long enough, I see a lot of people standing at the back and some sitting on stairs. Anyone who's got an empty seat next to me, put your hand up. There are some empty seats down here. And while you're finding your seat, I just want to tell everyone in this room something that you may not know. That analysis of C-51 and C-44 that Donald Gallaway just gave us, in particular Part 5 of C-51, and the change that's been made that will allow the introduction of security certificate evidence without disclosing that it was obtained by torture. This is a legal analysis that no one else in Canada has yet heard. Donald Gallaway has submitted it to some papers as an opinion piece. I hope it gets published. I'll be raising it in Parliament. Most of us who have been studying C-51 from the day that it was tabled have been focusing on the earlier parts of the bill. First of all, let me read you the full title of Bill C-51. I'll cover the dots that Donald didn't get to. It's, quote, an act to enact the Security of Canada Information Sharing Act, Act 1. The Secure Air Travel Act, to amend the Criminal Code, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act, and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. It is, in fact, an omnibus bill. It's difficult to get through all of it, and up until now, we've been so indebted to law professors who've been, as I've been, diving into parts 1 through 4, and then we all have gotten to part 5, the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act bit, and thought, somebody who understands immigration and refugee law better dive into this. And thank God Donald did, because this is an analysis that nobody else has heard, and we're going to have to get this out as well. When Stephen Harper launched this bill, I don't know if you know, it was not launched in Parliament. It was launched at a campaign-style rally in Richmond Hill, Ontario, in which Stephen Harper said, and I quote, "Violent jihadism is not a human right. It is an act of war," unquote. I don't know if the Prime Minister's language can get any more reckless or dangerous or ill-informed, but the two law professors with whom I've been working a lot and who are, I think every Canadian should be grateful, Professor Kent Roach is a law professor at University of Toronto, Craig Forsazes at University of Ottawa, and by the grace of God, they're both on sabbatical. They have done nothing but work on C-51 night and day. You can find their work, by the way, they've been publishing it like crazy. It's amazing. They call it legal analysis in real time. And they've been going through it piece by piece. One of the things they said in response to that kind of rhetoric from the Prime Minister is, quote, but this is from Kent and Roach, "False analogies between crime and war can contort law." That's putting it mildly. Let me go through, I want to tell you 3 things about C-51, 3 main takeaways, and I'll try to get through the sections as quickly as I can. Number 1, C-51 will not make us safer. People are worried about terrorism, and as long as people are scared about the terrorist threat and think this bill is going to make us safer, it's a lot easier to take away all our liberties. But C-51 will not make us safer, point 1. 2, it could well impede proper investigation of terrorist threats and their subsequent prosecution. And I'll explain why that is. And 3, the scope and the weirdness and the vagueness of the language throughout could catch up in a net of their various infiltrations and monkey-wrenching of groups from I don't know more to the raging grannies. This is a bill about Big Brother with secret tools, low thresholds of proof, and the potential for, and in fact, the creation of a secret police act. The Secret Police Act designation, which I used in the House of Commons on February 2nd, I took from the pages of the editorial of the Globe and Mail that same day. The Globe and Mail said this is a secret police act. This is a newspaper that has over and over again endorsed Stephen Harper and conservatives. So the conservatives' argument that this comes from, the opposition to C-51 only comes from people who are ideologically opposed to them, is falling apart. We now have Rex Murphy against C-51, and perhaps my favorite piece of writing on C-51 came from Conrad Black. I'm sorry. Familiar as he is with the prison system, he's gone to work on this. No, I think that informs his thought. I actually do. And what he said, I thought of him when you mentioned Vic Taves. He writes in the page of the Globe and Mail, Vic Taves and Julian Fantino ride again. And then he puts in brackets, and if that isn't a terrorizing thought, I don't know what is, but then again, terror thought is made illegal by this act. This act is not just about what you put on the website, it's about what you say in a private conversation. So let me walk through it as quickly as I can. Part 1 is the information sharing provisions. This also amends 17 different other acts, including the Fisheries and Oceans Act. You might wonder, what on earth would Section 4 of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Act possibly tell us about terrorist activity? Well, anything going on that CSIS wants to know, DFO must turn over all its documentation. You know, maybe someone from ISIS wants a drift net license. We want to know. This is the section of the Act which includes the extraordinarily overbroad definition of activity that undermines the security of Canada. You've probably heard about this one. This is the section of the Act that says that it undermines the sovereignty, security, or territorial integrity of Canada, and then it uses examples, such as interference with the capability of the Government of Canada in relation to intelligence, defense, border operations, public safety, administration of justice, diplomatic or consular relations, or the economic or financial stability of Canada. Another subheading is interference with critical infrastructure. And at the end it says, for greater certainty, it does not include lawful advocacy, protest, dissent, and artistic expression. And despite my asking the Minister of Public Safety, Stephen Blaney, the Justice Minister, Peter MacKay, and the Prime Minister in the House, all of whom actually rose in response to my question, does this exclude nonviolent civil disobedience? They just get up and parrot, you can't read, can the member for Saanich Gulf Island, we do not include lawful advocacy. Right. So nonviolent civil disobedience is clearly not excluded by this act. Activities that undermine the security of Canada, and this is a whole of government approach to sharing all the information they have about anybody they want to know about. No warrants are required, no info. Okay, moving on, part 2 of the act you've heard about, I'll skip over it at this point. It's the no-fly list section. Part 3 of the Act is really where the thought police come in. Part 3 of the Act is amendments to the criminal code to deal with propaganda. Now, as Donald says, we're all supposed to be imagining this is a hate-filled propaganda that gets people riled up about killing people. But this is really weird language. This language is every person who, by communicating statements, knowingly advocates or promotes the commission of terrorism offenses in general. Now, none of the law experts and professors, or by the way, a letter concerning this bill was also signed by 4 former prime ministers and I think 6 former chief justices of the Supreme Court of Canada, can figure out what terrorism offenses in general means. By the way, terrorist propaganda is defined as any writing, sign, visible representation, or audio recording that promotes, advocates, or promotes the commission of terrorism offenses in general. It's all very bizarre. Now, Kent and Rocha point out that unlike laws that we have against expression, we already limit freedom of expression in a number of defined areas. Hate speech, it's illegal, you can be prosecuted. Child pornography offenses, it's illegal, you can be prosecuted. But there are statutory defenses to being in possession of some of this stuff. And any private conversations are excluded. This section does not exclude private conversations. It does not require any element of willful or knowingly participating. There are a number of examples one can think of. What of people who are currently fundraising in Canada to send help to Ukraine? Is that towards the commission of a terrorist act in general? Well, it certainly would be against the laws of a number of countries. I want to move quite smartly now to Section 4. Which expands CSIS abilities to monkey wrench. And Donald's quite right, C-44 and C-51 have to be seen together because up until C-44, CSIS only existed to operate within Canada. Those who may remember what happened when the RCMP went rogue and burned down a barn in Quebec, we had the MacDonald Commission in 1984 said, you know, we've really got to separate out intelligence gathering from policing. These two things have to be kept separate. So CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, was created to be intelligence gathering only, within Canada only. And by the way, one of the other big findings from our commission was the Air India Commission. Air India looked at this and said, the Air India Commission of Inquiry said, we've got a problem here. The bombing of that plane and the loss of 390 lives, I don't know how many, some of you are too young to remember the Air India bombing, but it was, I think, 1984. And the bomb was placed on board the plane in Montreal Airport and blew up midair. Vancouver Airport, sorry. Vancouver Airport. Left Montreal this morning, look. Vancouver Airport. And Air India investigation discovered, of course, in the course of the investigation, RCMP had information about perpetrators, CSIS had had information about perpetrators, they were hiding information from each other, they weren't coordinating properly, and so there were a lot of very clear recommendations about what should be done to ensure that these intelligence agencies coordinated. There's also very significant advice on how intelligence should operate in the wake of the Maher-Arar scandal, and Mr. Justice O'Connor in the Arar situation said, we must have oversight, right? We must know what these agencies are doing and someone must be coordinating them. None of those recommendations have been put in place. And another omnibus bill that many of you will remember, Bill C-38, the omnibus budget bill that destroyed the Fisheries Act, Canadian Environmental Assessment, you remember that one? It also eliminated the Inspector General for CSIS, which was the only actual oversight. There is something called the Security Intelligence Review Committee, or CIRC, but it's a part-time board of people who review post facto only some of what CSIS is doing. So now we have CSIS with, you know, we already in the before C-44 and before C-51, the intelligence community and observers have been saying, compared to the EU, compared to the other countries with whom we share intelligence, it's called the Five Eyes, as in eyes, and it's the Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Of all of those countries, Canada has the weakest oversight. We're the only country with no parliamentary oversight, and we got rid of the Inspector General. And now we're saying CSIS can operate outside of Canada. We're saying CSIS doesn't just collect information anymore. Now CSIS has an obligation, if there are, this is under Part 4, if there are reasonable grounds to believe that a particular activity constitutes a threat to the security of Canada, the service may take measures within or outside Canada to reduce the threat. The CSIS agents do not need to obtain a warrant to take action to reduce the threat unless they decide for themselves that their actions will violate the Charter or that their actions will violate a domestic law. There does not seem to be any oversight of a CSIS agent requiring a warrant to break a foreign law. When I've pointed this out of the floors of the House of Commons, I have the Parliamentary Secretary, Roxanne James, actually said, the member for Saanich Gulf Island appears to think that the laws of Somalia are preferable to Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Like, how you got that out of what I asked, I can't believe. But anyway, what are the limits on the powers of CSIS agents? Well, if they don't think they're going to violate the Charter, and bear in mind, you have to have a fair degree of legal expertise to figure out something's going to violate the Charter. Our Minister of Justice quite often disagrees with the Supreme Court of Canada about what's a Charter violation. CSIS agents are going to make this decision for themselves and decide if it's going to violate the Charter, they'll go to a federal court judge for a warrant. Otherwise, they don't have to. If it's going to violate a domestic law, they need a warrant. They never have to report back to that judge how the warrant was executed, and they don't report to anyone else because there isn't adequate oversight. So the only limit in the legislation is this. In taking measures to reduce a threat to the security of Canada, the service shall not, A, cause intentionally or by criminal negligence death or bodily harm to an individual, B, willfully attempt in any manner to obstruct, pervert, or defeat the course of justice, or C, violate the sexual integrity of an individual. Those are their limits.
Intentionally.
Yes. So this is a police state law. This is to say we have minimal expectations of evidence and proof. We can expand the notion of what's a threat to the security of Canada. CSIS agents can do whatever they think is appropriate as long as they don't think it's going to violate the Charter or break a domestic law to interfere with. And some of the things that they do, they can ask for a warrant to both take things away from a place that they have access by warrant, or to install things. There's an interesting prospect. What are they installing? I probably should stop here. The main points about this are, again, if we were serious about, if this law was seriously focused on terrorism, first question is, can someone find a law enforcement officer or a CSIS agent who can find an example of where they lacked the tools they needed for investigation? As Donald has just mentioned, the security certificate regimes are very invasive. They suspend the rights of the accused to an alarming extent. But let's face it, our CMP officers have had the tools they needed to interfere with and disrupt and arrest the people in a couple of serious terrorist plots in Canada. And I'm glad they did it. Toronto 18, the Via Rail potential assault. The security and intelligence community itself has not complained they lack laws. But what this is a combination, I believe, of a couple of things. Donald's absolutely right. These are chapter and verse, essentially overturning what the Supreme Court has said they can and can't do by changing the law, so they can use evidence obtained by torture. They don't need to worry about CSIS agents running amok, either in Canada or overseas. But what's extraordinary about this is that when you consider what we learned from things like the Air India investigation, what we learned from the investigation to Maher Arar, we know that intelligence and policing activities are best kept separate, and best kept with someone overseeing what they're doing. It's quite clear that if this gets passed as is, it will not make us safer. It will definitely suspend civil liberties for people who are suspected of a wide range of nebulous threats to security. It will create a chill on speech. This is another one of the areas where Kent and Roach say, if you're trying to stop the radicalization of people, if this is your real aim, you don't want to chill speech. You want people to continue to talk to someone who seems to be bent in the wrong direction. But the way this works is guilt by association. Any kind of repetition, any kind of communication can be perceived as something that brings you into the scope of C-51's measures that were brought to us by Big Brother. I think it's the creation of a Frankenforce. And one last strategic point, and I'll sit down. I'm very grateful and pleased that the official opposition and Tom Mulcair opposed this bill. We need Trudeau to oppose it too. It's critical that the Liberals not vote for this thing, because we're going to need to repeal it after the election, and that will become more difficult if one of the major parties has voted for it. So before I sit down, I want to thank Sarah for moderating this, and I want to thank the Young Greens of the University of Victoria for organizing it, and I'm sure we're all happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.